queued it up really well. I don't know if I can answer the who will do all of this exactly, but I'm going to try and get at a little bit of what we can do to adapt to some of these sea level rise impacts. So I'm specifically going to talk at kind of a broader level what the Commission is doing to address sea level rise. Kristen and Melissa are going to talk a little bit more in detail about some of the permitting and regulatory aspect of some of those actions. But I do want to give sort of the briefest of overviews just so it sort of makes sense about why we're talking about sea level rise at the Commission. So we are a regulatory agency that we regulate the use of land and water within the coastal zone, and we do that through the context of the California Coastal Act. So sort of two main points that we talk about with the Coastal Act is that it requires protection of coastal resources. So that includes sort of public access, agricultural lands here, different habitats, environments, beaches, wetlands, all of that. And then it also talks about safety of new development and safety of development in different land uses. So because all of those things in the coastal zone will at some point be affected by sea level rise, that's sort of the connection for how we're talking about those. And we do that through several main avenues. One would be through local coastal programs. So these are sort of your planning documents for land use planning and sort of a more sort of overall view at a community level, and then also through coastal development permits, so kind of on a project scale, and then just also, of course, working with different partners and working groups and that sort of thing. So that's just a very brief background about why we're addressing this. There's a lot of work going on sort of statewide about sea level rise. That is happening at the local level. It's happening through other state agencies federally, and there's a lot going on. And so a couple of years ago, we decided we really needed to develop some guidance for how to address sea level rise within the context of our work. So we worked on this sea level rise policy guidance document. It was unanimously adopted by the Coastal Commission in August of 2015. And it focuses on planning for sea level rise in permit applications and local coastal programs, like I said. And it sort of contains, it's a pretty long document, so there's a lot of information in there talking about sea level rise science, projections, sort of the planning process for how to do this. It contains some legal context, so legal considerations for adaptation planning, and then a variety of adaptation responses, which I'll talk about a little bit more in a second. So it contains a set of guiding principles as well, which are sort of the broad recommendations for how we're considering sea level rise, and they fall into the 4 categories you can see there, using science to guide decisions, and thinking about how to minimize coastal hazards, protecting those coastal resources like I talked about, and then working together to address all these problems because it's going to involve a lot of coordination. Some things I really wanted to highlight are thinking about different scenarios. There is some uncertainty with the sea level rise science. Some of that's inherent because we don't know what the human decisions are going to be regarding climate emissions in the future. So we take sort of a precautionary approach where we think about the range of impacts that could possibly happen over the future. Alvaron talked about this a lot, just sort of as time goes on, what could be the impacts. So really thinking through all those different kind of eventualities. And then using all of that information to develop adaptive responses that could change over time. And those concepts come up a lot throughout the entire guidance document. So this is sort of the basic planning steps that we talk about through the guidance. Those first 3 are the vulnerability assessment kind of pieces. So really think about what are the potential, what is the range of sea level rise that we could get, how would that impact coastal resources. This is exactly what Alvin was talking about in his talk. And then the back end sort of pieces are what do we actually do about that. So what are the range of possible adaptation responses, and then how do we implement those either through broader policy, those local coastal programs, or through individual actions. That first piece I'm not going to spend a lot of time on. Alvaro talked about that a lot. The guidance talks about best available science, and for most of the state of California, we're using the projections from the National Research Council report. It is different here since we're subsiding, like Alvaro talked about, and have some of the really fastest rising sea levels in this area. So we do recognize that work that they've done as sort of the best available science for this area. But one thing I will point out is that recently the state came out with they're updating their own state sea level rise guidance, and they have a new science report out that is looking at some of that evolving science and understanding some extreme scenarios. There's a new 10-foot scenario that kind of is something we want to make sure doesn't happen. So we're still working to understand how that has changed things, and we're going to be coordinating and sending out sort of updated guidance as we understand those scenarios better. And then, so the next piece of that is the adaptation planning context. So we have in the guidance an entire chapter's worth of different adaptation strategy options, and these kind of fall into these categories you see on the slide, so protection, accommodation, retreat, as well as hybrid, which I'll talk about in a minute. And I do want to emphasize that we recognize that adaptation strategies you use in a port in San Diego are going to be very different from what you use on a beach, for example, or what you use here to address some of the agricultural lands and that sort of thing. So it is very context specific, and it's going to take a lot of work on a local or regional scale to think about how best to address sea level rise here on the ground. So I also just sort of, we talked about sea level rise, I mentioned this earlier, it sort of comes on through multiple different scales. There's that overall local planning process that looks at sort of the long-term horizon, and in our sphere we would consider that as coming through the local coastal program, those long-term land use planning documents. But then individual actions are going to be carried out on more of a local project scale, and that would be sort of through the coastal development permitting process, which Melissa and Kristen are going to talk about a little bit later. So that's just sort of the larger background about what we're doing to address sea level rise and how we fit in with this entire conversation. So I want to spend the rest of the presentation talking about a variety of adaptation strategies. And I want to say that, importantly, many of these strategies are things we already know about, we're already doing. And this is evidenced by the fact that I'm going to have pictures of these, many of them taken from the work that you've already done, Elrond. And so it's not really that we're figuring out completely new adaptation strategies, although in some cases maybe we'll have to do that. But it's really thinking about how to better deploy these, recognizing that there's now this sort of additional sea level rise dynamic component that we have to think about, and how do we address that sort of across the entire spatial scale, but also throughout time, and how do those change over time. So I have the rest of this talk organized into sort of protection, accommodation, retreat, like I talked about. And there's definitely gray areas in there, so don't get too hung up on it. But I also want to say that this is, again, just a broad overview. I'll talk a little bit about some of the pros and cons of these strategies. But this certainly isn't everything. This isn't to say that these are the only things that we could do here. It's just kind of trying to give a big picture. So some of those first ones that we'll talk about are those protection options. So these are the things that are like building barriers, basically, to keep water out. And these can range from some of the more traditional things that we've been doing. You see some pictures of dikes and levees here, and you could be just elevating those more, building those up to protect a little bit more against some of those extreme scenarios, those king tides that come in as sea levels rise. Could also mean fortifying those more to prevent some of the erosion issues that happen. Both of these would probably or potentially require widening the base of the dike or levee, which obviously takes up space and has some potential permitting challenges if you're moving out into the bay as filling wetlands and habitat areas. And you also need to coordinate with surrounding properties. So one sort of chink in the armor is going to potentially allow water in. So there is a coordination of process that would have to happen in there to make sure there's some consistency in how it goes all the way around. Other options that we showed, sort of working with all those tide gates that are already around, potentially having to retrofit or add new tide gates to address additional water issues as sea levels rise. Again, just keeping water out where we don't want it. With all of these, though, these sort of hard protection options, there are habitat impacts. So building these barriers will prevent sort of the natural evolution of those habitats. As sea levels rise in a sort of very natural environment where there's no development at all, most of those habitats would be able to grow and migrate and change and persist over time, even as sea levels rise. But if we're building these barriers, we're blocking development, and it sort of will just result in these areas being drowned and losing some of that habitat. And so with that, there are some permitting challenges that we have to consider. one way to address some of the habitat concerns is to use more natural infrastructure as these barriers instead. So you often can see these as like those dune systems that protect a lot of areas. May not be the biggest case here to protect some of the agricultural lands, but this is something that's talked about, for example, to protect development along beaches in other parts of the state and around the country. And certainly it'll sort of impact the spits out here. Other options are using like living shorelines. So these are using, again, that natural vegetation to build a kind of barrier, but it also has some added habitat benefits. And these take a range of sort of shapes and forms. There's some that are sort of more natural and just have like the fiber logs, and you often can see them using oyster shells that could build up oyster reefs, and that helps to break down some of the energy from waves and that sort of thing. So it's just sort of finding what works best in the area and what makes the most sense. There's also sort of eco-levees or horizontal levees. These are kind of the same idea as living shrines, except they take a lot more space, and it's sort of matching more of a elevation, sort of a slanted elevation going upwards. So you have some of the tidal lands moving up into more of the uplands, so it's more of a natural sloping kind of environment. I'll talk about this one a little bit more in a second, because this one obviously would take up a lot more space. And that's true of sort of all of these protection options, like I mentioned earlier on. They take up space in the bay, and that's, has some issues with fill and that sort of thing. And kind of the big outline question here is, even if we can protect that front side of all of these agricultural lands, it's not going to address the groundwater issues or stormwater issues that we were talking about just a second ago. So this is just one piece of the puzzle that can prevent some of the overtopping issues, but it's not going to prevent everything that we have to deal with sea level rise. So I want to move into the accommodation options. Accommodation is just sort of like, how can we move the water away from our land uses or developments? We're not blocking it, and we're not engineering a structure to block these things, but we are changing the lands or the development or the land use, what have you, just to make sure that it can more withstand and be resilient to some of these changing impacts. So with agricultural lands, some of the accommodation measures you might think of are just kind of those best management practices for how to deal with groundwater or stormwater and that sort of thing. In a slightly more urban context, you can see this as like low impact development, which is sort of mimicking sort of what would have been the natural hydrology and allowing water to infiltrate and run off where you want it to. So you can see that as like rain gardens or storm swales, bioswales, just sort of trying to have a natural hydrologic process, even though we've changed the land. It could also mean, in a more agricultural context, working with groundwater supplies and irrigation to try and better manage that, but considering sort of the impacts of how that will change with sea level rise. So sort of just better managing the water. I think it'll also mean things like making sure that all of our best management practices about protecting against polluted runoff and that sort of thing happens, so that even as sea levels rise and we're dealing with impacts to these lands, we're not also impacting other surrounding areas while we're trying to manage that. So, this is one way. These are good practices just in general. Probably potentially going to be negligible when you're dealing with huge amounts of groundwater. So it's, again, only going to be kind of time dependent for a little amount of time. A slightly more engineered approach that we talked about again is sort of pumping out that water that collects behind the dikes and discharging it into the bay, just sort of getting rid of it where we don't want it, since we have some of these drainage issues. Again, that'll work for a while. Eventually, with more sea level rise, the sort of frequency and duration of having to pump water out is probably going to increase, which should increase the cost of doing so. And then sort of a last accommodation strategy I'll talk about for now would be raising the surface elevation of the land, so just trying to stay above that rising groundwater, and you can do this by kind of laying sediment out over top of that area. These pictures are from the Steel Beach National Wildlife Refuge project that is doing this. I think it's also going on up here in the Humboldt Bay National Wildlife Refuge. And so this one, again, you know, it's fill and it's potentially problematic, but it does have habitat benefits if you're raising these areas. So really trying to think through these holistically and what are the benefits and costs, and trying to figure out what makes the most sense for the environment as sea levels rise. So yeah, these, you know, again, help buy some time, are good practices to have overall, but eventually, with rising groundwater and all those issues, there comes a time where we do have to retreat. And I think there are some benefits to retreat. You know, it's hard to hear, but this does allow for a lot of restoration projects within the bay, getting more of those restoration and wetland habitats back. This can sort of be low level, just reaching levees and letting sort of the water carry back through and having it sort of naturally evolve as it wants to. Here that might mean a lot of more mud flats, but eventually sediment might build up and get some of that upland marsh habitat. It could be a little bit more engineered. You can see these are pictures from a wetland restoration project from the Coastal Conservancy in Marin, where they reached a barrier up there, you can see that, and then they started elevating and contouring the land, planting marsh grasses to have more of that marsh habitat. This could include things like enhancing riparian areas and creek connections to get the sort of hydrologic connection between freshwater, saltwater, and just managing that more naturally. I think when it comes to thinking about how that works with people on the land and ag lands, maybe in trying to find other areas where agriculture could you know, pull back and have other ag lands. There's potentially not enough land for that, and so it's one thing we need to consider, but also it could be setting up programs to purchase conservation easements for, from these farmed wetlands and give landowners future development rights, giving those development rights on that land up, moving elsewhere. Obviously, retreat is like a really hard thing for people to think about. You know, these are very economically and culturally important lands. We heard about that first thing this morning. And so we want to do what makes the most sense. We want to sort of protect or accommodate these issues for as long as we can. It's just at some point we need to figure out what to do. But I do want to say, I talked a little bit about these hybrid options earlier. And that's sort of, you know, we need to use these strategies in a way that makes sense both now spatially, but then also over time, and it's sort of about identifying when these triggers for how to move make the most sense. And so a hybrid option could be, I talked about this eco-levee or horizontal levee takes up a lot of space, but what if instead of building out into the bay, we did this sort of process where you remove the current diked shoreline, push that back, do wetland restoration in front, you get some of the habitat benefits from that wetland restoration in front of the diked lands, but still having area, still having some protection for farmlands over time. So just thinking about how these sort of trigger over time and trying to understand those, how do we balance all the different competing needs and uses of these areas in a way that makes the most sense. So there is a lot of work, and we want to, you know, there's a lot of impacts and vulnerabilities that we have to think about, but we do need to consider and work together for how best to manage all these areas.